There's a specific type of RPG fatigue that I don't hear many people talk about. I think the one that's more commonly talked about is the one where you're completely stretched thin, you dread every upcoming session, and it's the kind of really deep fatigue that the only real solution for it is to either switch things up completely from what you're playing or just kill whatever campaign you're currently doing and just take a break. But the fatigue I want to talk about in this video is this micro fatigue I get every once in a while. It's something that I usually get as a GM, but I also see players get too. I'm sure there's already a very long German word for it, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to refer to it as micro fatigue. I don't know how much this will be like my other RPG advice videos, because even though I do have advice and suggestions I'll get into later, this is also just to make people feel better if they've experienced this at all. Have you ever had a moment or moments throughout a session or campaign as either a player or GM where you take the easy way out? Do you take the less interesting or the more straightforward answer because either you can't think of a cooler alternative, or you do think of one, but just the idea alone of having to play out the alternative makes you feel wary? As an example of what I mean, let's say you're running a game and your players kind of made it through the last part of the dungeon without too much trouble. The session hasn't been boring, but there's definitely been less dramatic resistance than you're either expecting or were hoping for. However, you and perhaps your players know that there is a rival party that is also after the same artifact that they're after. But just the idea alone of having the rival party show up and describing their dramatic entrance and what you're going to say as them and the tactics you're going to have to employ as the 4 different enemy NPCs just makes you feel tired. And so you just let the players escape the dungeon with no issues at all, and you wrap up the session. And let's say, for the sake of it, that your players are kind of surprised, but there's no complaints or anything. Everybody had a pretty good time. They sort of chalk up, their good fortune to good rolls and being smart, and, they leave after that session looking forward to the next adventure. But you're left knowing what you didn't do, what elements you could have reincorporated, what parts and aspects you could have made more compelling. But just like the comeback you think about the next day in the shower, you're left thinking what you could have done better in the moment. I've had these moments every once in a while, I think like all GMs have, and one thing I have learned growing up in the internet age is that if you've, dealt with something, or if it's something that, you've experienced at all, there's a very high chance that there's other people out there who have experienced the same thing. The reason why I differentiate this from normal, big burnout that people usually talk about, and, all that sort of GM burnout that's brought up all the time in different discussions, is that unlike that kind of burnout, I don't think this means necessarily that you are done with the campaign or GMing or, the game as a whole and RPGs as a hobby or anything like that. A lot of it can come down to just being really tired after a long week of work, not sleeping well, just randomly feeling a bit creatively drained that day or distracted by something in your personal life, and therefore has the added difficulty of not having a one-size-fits-all solution. One week, you might be improvising perfectly, going through great scenes with different characters and having amazing combats and just all these really, really fantastic set pieces and moments. And then the next week, you throw away more combat encounters at the party to take up time because you're dreading the scene you have planned where the PCs get betrayed by their friend for very complex reasons, and it just feels like you'll be better for it next week when you have more energy. And players go through this too. I have had many players in the past who, you might have a dilemma or situation that was, even if it's not made for them, is something that should be interesting enough for their character. And in the past, they have done really, really well. But for some reason, this time, you can tell just by how maybe exhausted they seem, or just something feels kind of off, where they kind of just go like, my character wouldn't do this, is nothing for my character, or, they just decide to attack a lot more instead of actually role-playing, because it seems like it's a lot less effort to put brain space into just doing tactical combat maybe than it is to actually try and be creative and role-play and trying to figure out a solution with the NPCs or whatever is going on, where they do seem to be acting a little bit different than they did, the week before or the whole past campaign part. And what I really want to send home is that you're not a bad player or GM for doing this. This is something that I think pretty much everybody does. For the most part, I'm sure there are some people who will admit to never having this issue or not having any idea what I'm talking about, but I find that pretty hard to believe. We all have off days, and it's completely normal to have that. Just because you have an off day this week does not mean that your best last week was just some fluke, and that in reality you actually are just a bad player or GM, and this is what your true gaming is like. We just have off days sometimes. So outside of giving some comfort that, you're not alone or you're not bad or anything like that, what are some things that we can actually do to help alleviate it in the moment? First, let's start with the communication side of things. If you're having an off day, just talk with your group and say that you don't have the brain space to play RPGs today, and most normal people are going to be cool with this. I genuinely mean this because I think a lot of people, and I've dealt with this myself, where people are either sick or they're tired or whatever, and they really aren't in a good space. Now, this is more for GMs than it is for players, since a player can kind of, take a backseat a little bit, depending on what's going on in that session. They could be a really big session for that player, and so they might want to have their all. But almost every time I've ever had somebody go, no, I'm fine. I know I'm sick, but like I'm gonna play. It's all good. It's almost always been one of the worst sessions, to the point where I was like, I kind of wish we just didn't play today. I feel like a lot of things happened in the session that are worse now in our overall campaign because we didn't just, take a week off, or, we got sort of not into a fight, but maybe things got a little bit snarky or unnecessarily stressed because people weren't feeling their all. And I feel like those are the kind of things where when you can recognize that beforehand, don't force everybody to start, playing just because you really want to make it or it's been a while. If you're really, really feeling bad, just fucking call it. However, with that, there does come the caveat of you do need to be wary of doing that too much. I know there are lots of discussions, and there have been for years. I remember this was a thing when I was in high school about a decade ago, that people kind of flake out pretty quickly, and that can really suck. But I think there's a lot of people who, even though flaking has become a lot more normal, when it comes to plans like this, if you are canceling constantly because you feel tired that day, because I think a lot of us feel tired, it's a pretty brutal time to be alive right now, but I won't go down that tangent. But it is a time where I do see that more and more people I find around me are a lot more tired all the time, but they still want to do stuff. I do think that if you're canceling constantly, that is when you should kind of maybe stop and look and go, do I actually want to continue this campaign? Is that something that we're actually doing? Because people are taking time out of their lives, or, what little, time they have on their weekends or whatever to do this. And then I keep bailing every week. So that's one of those things to look at that, every once in a while, it's good to be like, hey, listen, you know what? I think it'd be better if we just don't play a day because I just don't have the brain power. But then if that becomes a habit that you constantly do, that's when you should look at, maybe some alternative solutions. Because the thing is, too, is that just because you cancel your D&D plans or RPG plans, whatever, doesn't mean you need to cancel all plans. You might be too tired to do anything and, everybody just calls it. But one thing you can do, for example, which my group did after Christmas because we took a break, we were playing Reach of the Roach God, and we were at a point that was very exposition heavy, that was going to lead into a lot more stuff. But what we did, because it felt like everybody was pretty wasted after Christmas, was we just did one session where we kind of just chilled, hung out, chatted for the first time in I think about a month at that point, and we just did kind of like a recap of what's been happening in the campaign so far. And so that was a really nice session for that game, because we got all our brains back together to sort of figure out, okay, what were we doing? Oh, this is where we were at the campaign. This is what we were doing. Here's some threads we're following. And then we have a big exposition thing coming up next week. So we were able to, get ourselves refreshed and ready for the week after. And it still didn't feel like a non-productive time because we were all so tired. The other thing, too, is that if you guys are friends outside of RPGs, because I know some people are just groups that only play RPGs and they're not, necessarily friends outside of that. They don't really do much, past a few things. One thing you guys can suggest is if you do cancel, maybe play video games or board games or, have a movie night. I've done that a bunch of times where it's like, well, I still want to see my friends. I still want to hang out with them. I just don't have the brain space to actually play. So instead, we'll watch movies or do whatever. That's something a lot less intensive than shoring up the energy to roleplay. Also, maybe that can become a regular thing if you are a weekly group. I do think that there's a lot of people who really, really want that weekly campaign that goes on forever, but there's something to be said for maybe switching to bi-weekly, because a lot of people, I'm sure people who are watching this will probably attest in their own lives, a lot of times when you have weekly games, you guys don't necessarily get every week going, or like most weeks going. And I think the reason for that is a myriad of reasons depending on who you are, obviously. But I've learned that I have a lot of friends who really like RPGs, but they do not like it anywhere near as much as me. And for them, taking every weekend to do an activity like this is too much for them, but they're super happy to do it once a month or twice a month. They just don't want to do every week after work they do RPGs. It's just not as much their passion as doing other things as well. So that's the other thing too, is that if you guys do turn to a bi-weekly group, you can just have a week off kind of thing. Or, like I said, you can do video games, board games. If you still like that ritual of everybody getting together, hanging out, seeing each other on the weekend, or, you know, whenever you guys do see each other, then you can just replace that activity with a different activity. And hopefully that does help alleviate some of the issues, because I do think some people flake out because they just sort of dread going to the same thing every week. They might not feel that if they go, oh, you know what? I mean, it's just week on, week off. Super easy for me to do this. I don't feel like a big part of my free time is going to this thing that I enjoy, but not necessarily as much as, you know, Jerry or Brad or me or whoever, you know? So it's always something to look at, and sort of just, as always, most of the issues you'll ever see online or with your groups is just talk to your group. So anyway, that was a long tangent, but I think you get the idea. If that isn't possible, or your issue is one that comes in sort of momentarily, where you are a good day of, and the window to cancel is kind of closed, and, you know, once the game's starting, or right before the game, or during the game, that's when you start feeling this sort of micro fatigue I'm talking about, then what are some solutions we can do for that? Firstly, taking from narrative games that don't put everything on the GM are fantastic to pull from. Instead of you figuring out what every complication or revelation or next issue is, you can sometimes put that onto the players themselves. If somebody's attempting something very dangerous, like scaling a wall or jumping over a river or whatever it might be, asking a player, hey, what do you think the worst thing that can happen here is? Or, you know, asking, hey, so if Jerry succeeds, what would be an interesting complication? Depending on if you're new to the hobby, or if you're really old to the hobby, or if you're somebody who just does not like to try new things, or doesn't really see new playstyles or anything like that, this might be a bit of a taboo line that you don't cross at your party, but I think that's really silly and stupid. I think all the best groups and all the best players I've ever come across are people who understand that collaboration comes above all else. It does not matter if you are a GM or a player, if you have a hard line. Overall, if you can all work together to make the story better, that is what makes the best games. The same thing can happen on the player side, where they might be a little bit lost as what to do next. I think GMs have the same issue where they should also maybe ask for help for players, like I mentioned. But I do know for some reason, some goons think that for some reason is breaking GM kayfabe. But as a player, you can just say, hey, I'm gonna be honest, I'm a little hungover, and I'm a little bit trouble being crave today. Hey, other player, do you have any ideas what might happen here? I think most groups tend to have at least one other person who'll be very happy to try and help out and collaborate some solution to whatever's going on. That tends to be some of the best moments in these games, is when you work together to come up with a solution. Another thing to do is to just stop and try and break down these gigantic set pieces and bits and events down into digestible little pieces. Let's take the example from earlier where the players have gone into the last room of the dungeon and they've grabbed the artifact, and you think this would be a great time to bring in the rival party. It may feel like a lot because you have to think about how you're going to play the different rival NPCs, what tactics are they going to employ, how is the combat going to play out, what roleplay is going to happen, all these sorts of things that come up and make this set piece / event that you're about to do with the players. But if you just stop and break it down into bullet points, it doesn't have to be that large to sell the scene. All you need to do is tackle the moment-to-moment parts and try not to worry about what makes sense, and just worry about what happens as it comes to you. So for this example, the party picks up the artifact, and then you quickly describe, you hear footsteps behind you, and you see the familiar face of Grunkus Shalunkus and his band. And he pulls out his sword and he says, "We'll be taking that." That one sentence establishes everything you need. They want what the PCs have, and they're ready to fight for it. Now, the PCs may try and reason with them, but don't forget that some NPCs just can't be reasoned with, and that's completely okay to play characters that way if you do not have the brain space to deal with the RP. We'll talk about RP in a little bit, but for the case of this right now, we're going to say RP is off the table. They cannot be reasoned with. This gives your players 3 different choices. The players give the artifact over, they run, or they fight. I'm not going to get into how this isn't railroading. The players have multiple options, and how they go about any of the 3 options is up to them, not to mention any weird magic that they may employ. Also, I'm not saying what you should be doing every time. This is purely about surviving through your fatigue, not mastering a hostile roleplay encounter. So that was quick and easy, and next we can establish combat, assuming that the players, don't run or don't just hand over and, try and walk away with their lives. Do not think too hard about what every character is going to do on their turn and how you're going to make this a cinematic masterpiece. Right now, you're just focused on giving the players a fun challenge. Just use simple reasoning and obvious tactics. If one player does something really well, like a spell that hits hard, maybe have the rival ranger and caster target them. Fires are easy and might just go for the front line or stop PCs from getting past them. Tactics will vary with what system and what character monsters there are, and it seems obvious to say, just do the most obvious move. But what I'm really trying to send home is just to break it down turn by turn. Don't think about how you're going to run this like a perfect cohesive squad with amazing tactics. Just put your brain on reaction mode and return whatever the players do. If a character does something bombastic, maybe they draw ire. If one of the NPCs and one of the other PCs have, past rival relations, like both the rogues being, rivals in the Thieves Guild in town or something like that, maybe those two will go for each other so that they can sort of play out that antagonism that they've already been dealing with that's now coming to a boiling point. This can be applied to anything, and it's a really great lesson to learn, because you will find that if you do take things step by step, turn by turn, swing by swing, and you'll see that like most of the combat is done with either characters dead or running away or whatever it might be, that you find yourself realizing that, oh my god, this whole giant set piece that I was so like stressed about is almost done, and it's actually going pretty well. Now, if you want to avoid combat for whatever reason, or you want to disregard and think that, you have enough brain space to do RP and combat, and you're going to give all the options to the players, that's, fully up to you, and it's going to totally matter moment to moment and context for how much brain power you actually do have. The practice is essentially the same. A big thing with this is to just know what the motivation of the NPC is, and to use that as the core to come back to. Does the rival party just want money? Maybe they'll, strike a deal with the party and be like, listen, we're going to take 70% of the share of profits from the artifact, and you can have the other 30%. And from there is where you can start, doing some of the negotiations. You can just throw out a thing, just a demand, and you can let the players do all the work of bidding them down, whether it's, well, how about if we do this, we get 50-50 and we'll give you a map, or how about there's 4 of us here and 4 of you guys there. 50-50 sounds good to me, unless you want to get into a fight right now where you might not come out of it alive, and all kinds of things where essentially just the combat, what you really want to do is react to what the players are doing. And you might also, depending on how fatigued or tired you are, be a little bit more lenient in what you allow them to have. That's not me saying to be a full pushover just to get through the scene. It's more me saying that you might have played them completely unbending to actually be somebody who can be convinced or talked down to the players at all. But instead, you're like, all right, they're giving me a pretty good argument here. I'm going to make them roll for it. And if they fail this roll, combat's going to begin. Or if they fail this roll, they're going to disagree, and we're going to have to keep the negotiations going until we find middle ground that the PCs and NPCs can agree to. And it may seem too easy just to be like, oh, well, make them a little bit more easily negotiable with the players. But what you just have done there is perhaps create the next arc for your campaign, where perhaps the artifact isn't about money. Maybe there actually is a greater goal that you had with this. There's a bigger story here. And let's say the magic user of the rival party needs that artifact to save their sister. This might be a really quick thing to be like, oh, this is a level of humanity the players weren't expecting. Okay, maybe we'll help this group out, but then afterwards we get the artifact or whatever it might be. And all you gotta do there is agree to that, and then that's next week's problem. You can just worry about whatever issues might come up between them working together for this next arc that you're doing. Or if the players did negotiate the rival party in a way that was really not great for the rival party, but they don't realize until later, or they were kind of outgunned and they didn't realize it, or whatever it might be, then again, that's a next arc issue where they might want revenge, or they might come back with a lot more people than they did this time. So even if things feel like, oh, I made it a little bit too easy, the players got that a little bit too unscathed, I only did like 1 roll when I should have done like 3 rolls, or whatever it might have been that you think you could have done better than what you did, just remember, characters that aren't killed are just opportunities that you can use for later. And if anything, not killing them just fleshes them out more, and also might piss off the players more. Because there's one thing with players are some of those spiteful and prideful people, and just the idea that a group might want what they have or has the audacity to demand what they have, the players might really hate this group. So they don't kill them now, they might have a thing of like, oh, perfect, we have this recurring sort of villain that we keep dealing with. So don't feel like, oh, if I just let them have it, that's the end of it and everything was too easy. It just means you have opportunities later that you can bring back in. And again, the more you bring them and put them in front of the player's face, the more they will be real, living, breathing people to the players and will be a lot more interesting going down the line. And the big thing with all this stuff, both combat and RP, is that the best thing you can do if you're super, super fatigued and tired is to listen to your players. When your players are discussing amongst each other about what they're worried about, what they think is going to happen, what sort of things that they should be on the lookout for, what they're taking steps preparation against, that is the time to listen. Because I guarantee your players will give you better ideas than your sleep-deprived brain ever could. So seriously listen to them. The amount of times where I had an idea of what I was going to do next, I wasn't, all that married to. I was like, oh, I'm just going to do this. I think this will be a fun thing. And then a player goes, oh, man, I was really scared that werewolf we met earlier was going to come back, but blah, blah. I'm like, oh, yeah, that werewolf from earlier. That's a way better idea than what I was going to do. Yeah, you guys are getting fucked now. This is perfect. And so it's always good to listen to your players because, trust me, their fears, use those, and that will fuel a lot of great moments because players also love being right. And if a player goes, I think that werewolf or vampire or, the rival group we hate is going to be there, and they're right, they fucking love it. So go for it. But to be honest, in general, I don't really know how much there is to do about this issue because, like I mentioned before, the micro fatigue comes from so many different factors that it could be a number of things, and depending on who you are, there's so many different players and GMs and types of people that a lot of different advice might just not apply to you, or if it does, it might not apply in that moment. But I mostly just wanted to make this just to really send home to people that, like, you are not a bad player or GM just because you have off days like this where because you took a worse option over, that somehow means that you really are a bad, uncreative, terrible person, and every time you do stuff properly, it's because it was just a fluke. And I'm pushing this more because I've mentioned in past videos how I'm noticing a lot of it in Discord servers, but I've noticed on Reddit, even though I've been there less these days because it's a cesspool, just how shitty a lot of people are to people, new and old, where people really, really, really want you to know that they're right and that you're a bad player if you don't follow this philosophy or theory. If you don't do X or Y, you must be terrible. Fucking up and taking the, less interesting solution. Using riddles instead of, doing, I don't know, some new style of puzzle that's big right now in 2024 or whatever. Somehow that makes you a bad GM. When it's like, I don't know, man, I was playing with my friends and I was kind of tired and I remembered a riddle I read that day and I decided to use it. Fuck me, I guess, right? And so I feel like that's the stuff I'm really pushing back on because I have also found that, firstly, the people who say that shit either don't play nearly as much as they want you to think they do, and even if they do, they're probably really awful to play with. They're probably completely just insufferable people. Listen, I'm all about reading new theory and trying out new ideas and philosophy and gameplay styles and everything. I want to constantly improve as a GM and expand the things I do and have done. But at the end of the day, these are meant to be for fun, and I also have learned that most people do want to get better, but most people also just care about playing with their friends or emulating the media that they've done, and it can be really disheartening, trying to talk about maybe mistakes you made or things like that, and then getting hit with, well, you should have done these things, or, oh, you should watch these 5 videos, or you should buy this book, or, whatever things you should consume to make sure that you don't fuck up like you did last time. When really, your issue was just that you didn't really get that much sleep that time, and it's not that big of a deal, but you feel bad about it because, like I said, there's all these videos of people online who are saying players who do that or GMs who do that, it's like a carnal sin that you'll never wash clean from yourself. I'm being very dramatic, obviously, but my point being is that I've seen far too many people now who get incredibly discouraged by really, really just, I don't know, shitty comments or responses. And to be clear, I am not immune from this. I've done it myself. My Discord has done it. It's a thing with online, but it can just really suck. The only people I think are bad GMs are people who refuse to analyze what they've done, have some humility, and try and figure out what they can do better. They refuse to analyze their mistakes or try to improve from those things before, and will more just project onto other people what other people should be doing and why they're bad, or, you know, whatever it might be. Because the fact of the matter is that if you are going out there watching RPG advice videos to try and get better, if you're reading blog posts, or, you know, trying out new systems, or just thinking about what you could have done better, there's a very good chance that if you're not already a very good GM, that you're on your way there. Because the first thing you have to do is to look at what you need to do better, and then also show yourself some grace, because at the end of the day, we're just playing silly fucking games, you know? But anyway, I've been rambling long enough. This got way more melodramatic than I meant for to, but I just really want to just, like I said, send home. It's all good. If you fuck up, it's not the end of the world. You're not a bad GM. Keep playing. You'll get better. And you'll fuck up again, too. But it doesn't matter. Because also, chances are you're playing with your friends, they don't give a shit, and they're just there to have fun and drink beer and kill goblins. And that's all everybody there wants to do. So don't blind yourself with what you could have done better, and just try and take those lessons and use them productively to do better next time. In any case, that's pretty much everything for today. I just want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for supporting me. You guys are amazing. If you want to get videos a day early, if you want to get updates and, you know, vote on certain video polls and that sort of thing, or even, you know, get a really cool purple name in the Discord, think about joining my Patreon. It's heavily appreciated. Anyway, have yourselves a good one, and stay safe out there.